We are live. Welcome, truth seekers. I'm really excited to have Gay Hendricks with me here today. Welcome, Gay.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. Good to see you again. I haven't seen you in quite a while.
I know. So for you people watching out there, Gay is someone who's been a tremendous influence in my life. I will forever be grateful for everything that you've given me, everything that you've shown me in person or through your books. Viewers of this show will be very familiar with this cover because I've shown it many times on the show already. And you've just written a follow-up to this guy, which is coming out in September, right?
Very excited about that. Yes, it just went on sale for pre-order about a week or two ago, and it's called The Joy of Genius.
The Joy of Genius.
It's the next step beyond the big leap. I'm so excited about it because it kind of summarizes everything that I've learned since the big leap came out, and I've been diamond cutting on it for the last few weeks, and so I've got it down to like a 25,000 word manuscript that you could probably read in an hour if you were on an airplane, so that was my goal, to write a book that was so essential and so spare that you could pick it up at the airport and read it on your commuter flight from New York to Washington or LA to San Francisco.
That is amazing. I love that. I'm looking forward. I have my pre-order in already. I'm definitely looking forward to that. Yeah, and my parents are actually in town right now, and so we're going to go see the Met. And every time I go to the Met, I go to see that portrait that you showed me. God, the Dutch painter, what's his name? I forget it right now. Rembrandt, that's what it is. And
the self-portrait. Yeah,
exactly. It's so powerful.
In fact, I mentioned that in The Joy of Genius. I talk about that because one of the things you've probably learned, and most of your viewers have learned in their personal growth journey, is that you don't really get anywhere until you can become honest with yourself because our first relationship is with ourselves, and if things aren't going well in relationship out here, you always have to go in there and say, how am I designing? Why would I design it like this? Or, why would I be creating my life with so much pain in it right now? So the moment you begin to be that honest with yourself, a whole bunch of miracles begin to unfold. It's like you get in step with the universe, and then you're carried on by some sort of larger than us tide of energy that once we learn how to participate with it, takes us into a whole new dimension of life.
Yes. What is there to say to that other than yes? It's so hard though. Sometimes it's so much easier to be like stuck in your patterns and blame other people for what's going on, because it really looks like it's this other person doing it, or these people or whatever it is.
Well, you see, that's the way though the universe is designed, because in the beginning there was oneness, there was one something, and then it created two of something, and then created four of something, and so the whole game has been about creating more complex relationships. So here we are 15 billion years down from the original creation of the universe, and we're pretty complicated beings. And to enter into a relationship with another person means that you first entered into a relationship with yourself. Because up until you have a relationship, most of us have what we call an entanglement.
Yes.
It's two things hooked together so that the freedom of each is encumbered.
Right.
And so the trick in life, the great goal of life, is to extricate yourself from entanglement and come into relationship with yourself and with other people and with the cosmos itself ultimately.
Right. Okay. So this is fantastic, because this is everything I wanted to talk to you about, and the reason why. I just want to, on the intro level, because I have this one too right here, Learning to Love Yourself, which was your first kind of mainstream psychology book. Is that correct? You did written psychology textbook. You have a PhD from Stanford, if I'm correct?
Well, yes, I got my PhD from Stanford in counseling psychology many years before I wrote that book. But I did a lot of academic writing, and And then I kind of had a big life crisis where I realized I wanted to do things that got out into the mainstream. I was not happy with it being contained in a journal that was only read by 500 pairs of graduate student eyes every year. And so I actually taught one of the first courses on cable television way back, from the University of Colorado, where I was a university professor at the time. An opportunity came along to teach a course on cable television, and I was the first person who signed up for it. Nobody else wanted to do it, turned out. So, and then when Oprah came along and, put us out there in front of 10 million people, when Conscious Loving came out. But yes, Learning to Love Yourself was the breakthrough book for me, where I broke through to writing from my heart. Up until then, I'd been writing from my head and doing a pretty good job of it, but we always say that 12-inch journey from here to here is the longest one you'll ever make. In a way, it's the last one you'll ever make, because once you get this incredible mind we've inherited combined with your feelings and your inner essence and your dreams and your goals and your loves and your, all of the stuff that's in that rich inner world. You see, if you think of the human brain as being roughly the same size as a grapefruit, it is. It's about the same size as a grapefruit. And the thinking part of the mind, the new cortex, the one we're using right now to do this conversation with, is only the size of the rind. The juicy part of the grapefruit is all limbic stuff like feeling and sensations and all the different richnesses of life that you can't get to with the rind of the grapefruit. And so part of the purpose of the rind of the grapefruit also is to protect ourselves from the things underneath that are trying to get out. Because, it was just 500 years ago that the Pope, forget which one it was, had to put out a message to all the people in the church that it was absolutely forbidden to fornicate in the back of the church during Mass. And you people better shape that up quickly. And so that became, if you think of that as only 500 years ago, human beings have evolved quite a bit, that they don't have to put that in the bulletin anymore. It's kind of taken for granted. And so here we are at this stage of evolution. I always like to look at things evolutionarily, because this limbic system of ours has been here for millions of years, but this new cortex has only been here for a wink of the eye.
Which actually brings me to AI is a big theme in technology these days, and what mystifies me is it seems like what's being mimicked is just the cortex and not all the juicy stuff inside, right? So, it's like a lot of technology seems to be missing that point, that's actually what makes us human.
Yes, well, I have mixed feelings about that, because that's absolutely correct. And part of me wonders, wow, wouldn't it be great to have a technology that could be hooked up to our limbic system too, so that you just didn't see the movie, you feel the movie, and that you don't just hear what a TED Talk is saying, but you can feel the underlying emotion of whether the person even means it or not, or whatever the issue is comes through on the emotional level. But on the other hand, I have a little bit of a fear that once Silicon Valley gets hold of that stuff, it's all over.
Right.
That if they have control of our minds and our bodies and our feelings and that kind of thing, we're being marketed to constantly.
Yeah. Well, I imagine it would be tricky if you're an actor, and now we're not just seeing the image, but we're actually literally your feelings are being transmitted, and all of a sudden this whole concept of is this actor believable or not gets an entirely new dimension, requiring a new much deeper skill set there, it seems. So the theme, one thing that I see in the world right now, right, is a lot of divisiveness in politics, in the mainstream conversation sphere, if you will, right? Men versus women, and the Me Too movement and all that stuff. Blacks versus whites, poor versus rich, left versus right. And it seems to me that that was exactly what you were talking about, right? We create, we multiply, and then we're 2, and then we're 4, and then we're 8, and we don't realize that it's all the same thing. So what is your take on that?
Yes. Well, here's a phenomenon in human relationships that everybody can feel the truth of. Human beings go through a constant pulsation of getting closer to and getting further away from other human beings, organisms of any kind. So we have a pulsation going, and it gets back to the first year of life. In the first year of life, the first 6 months of life is about union, closeness, getting nurtured. And some of us have disturbances about that come from that very time in life. I know my mother became ill and was not able to care for me in the early stages of my life. And so, that caused stuff that came up in relationships later on that I didn't realize it was associated with that early deprivation. And so, it took some detective work to figure that out. And as a result, my relationships have blossomed enormously from not overlaying that old trauma on top of what was trying to happen now. And so, in the first 6 months of life, it's about union. In the second 6 months of life, we're learning to crawl. And so it's about exploration, individuation. In other words, union, individuation. Union, individuation. Charismatic politicians, usually of the Democratic stripe, have a way of bringing people together. Like Barack Obama, he had a lot of black people voting for him, and he had a lot of white people voting for him. He brought together, whereas in the latest election in the U.S., there was a huge divide. White people voted for Trump, and a lot of white people and black people and brown people voted for Hillary Clinton. And although we won the election, it ended up not counting. And so, due to a technical call. And so, the fact is, though, that a majority of us like to be friends with black people, and we like to be friends with lesbians, and we like to be friends with people in same-sex marriages. My wife and I, for example, Katie and I, have actually performed 6 or 8 same-sex marriage. We've celebrated, we've been the officiants or whatever you call it.
Ceremonies, yeah.
And so bringing people together is a sacred calling for a lot of us. But then people who have been wounded in the other direction have a tendency, since they've never experienced that kind of nurturing, they want everybody to feel that pain too.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that's the case with like someone like Trump specifically, or like
yes.
Republicans in general, or?
Well, I think it comes to a head in people like Trump, who represent kind of an extreme of the Republican aspect. Like I have dear friends of mine that are Republicans, and they're welcome in my house, and I don't argue with them. We just have different points of view, and there's no need to hate each other. Right. And in fact, most of the people in my family consider me kind of a radical outcast because I do things like vote for Hillary Clinton. And support
and live in Ojai, California,
and give money to try to get the marijuana laws straightened out, so that kind of craziness is not being inflicted upon people who just want to use a plant,
Right.
And I have an objection to that kind of imposition of government control on people. Mm-hmm. And so I don't want, like most of my women's friends also don't want the government owning their uterus. They want to own their own uterus. They don't want the Republicans to own their uterus.
Meaning choice abortion policies?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, all it matters is that it's government ownership of the uteruses.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, I don't happen to be a woman, but if I were a woman, I would certainly object to that. Just like I would not want any part of my body owned by the government that tells me exactly what I got to do with that part of my body.
Right, right. Yeah, it's fun. I mean, I grew up in a country where abortion was free, famously, like early on, and has been for a long time, and so that's pretty natural to me. Although I can see the other argument of like, well, this is a life, and like we don't allow people to murder people. You know, that is one thing that we don't do, and everybody agrees that there is a certain time. But like you can't have an abortion in the 8th month, right? So I see the argument, and yeah. I think that's, yeah.
But I don't think anything should transcend the woman's power over her own body.
But wouldn't that logic mean that you would allow abortions in the 8th month?
No, because at that point, it becomes a public event because the baby can survive outside.
Okay, so that's the criteria.
Yeah, I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess the one thing that I'm really curious about is like I see I've found for myself, most of my life I felt like a victim in so many ways, and I know that that's something that you've come across with in your work as well, right? That sense that, well, it's someone's fault. It's like, for me, it was like being born in the wrong country, or by the wrong parents, or not having the right friends, or being supported. It was like whatever it was someone else's
having
fault.
The wrong kind of face.
Yeah. Yes.
Like when I was a teenager, I had the worst hair.
Right.
There was nothing that could be done with it. Mm-hmm. And so, I can remember painful episodes of my life when I was 12 years old trying to beat this thing into some sort of submission. And it just wasn't possible. So I felt cursed by my hair.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So
you're lucky. You've got great hair, so you didn't have that curse.
No.
But you made up a different one.
Yes, exactly. Hold, give me 1 second. I just want to do something about the door because it's slamming over there. There we go.
I was noticing your guitars. I completely was not noticing what was in the background.
Oh, yeah.
Noticing the one, that square one that looks like a cigar box.
Yes.
What is that called? Because the first time I ever saw Bo Diddley, that's the kind of guitar he played.
Oh, yeah. They're called a Bohemian. It's like an oil can that they make into, I don't think there's actually ever been oil in that, but it's an oil can type thing that they make into a guitar. Yeah, it's fun. I know you have a couple of guitars as well. Somewhere in the back.
I can't see them from here, and I also have a bass, and I have a new acquisition too.
Oh, yeah?
Get this, a bass ukulele.
Oh, yes. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's this little tiny thing. I'm having a blast with it.
That's super fun.
One of my, by the way, one of my ways of staying youthful up now into my 70s is that I do something new every year, like learn a new musical instrument. Mm-hmm. Or, that's often the form it takes. If you look around my office, I've got a couple of shakuhachi flutes and a mountain dulcimer and a ton of blues harps scattered around depending on what key I happen to be in the mood for that day. Mm-hmm. So I have to kind of do an inventory now and then clear out stuff because I pulled up a backlog in here. But basically, there's a lot of stuff to play with in my office.
I believe so. I'm sure have you done the wealth dynamics test? It's just one of my favorite little personality tests. Roger James Hamilton, if you're familiar with him. Anyway, I think we're probably the same type, the creator. That would be my guess. So anyway, the victim stuff. So when someone what I've learned in part from you is that seeing myself as a victim is not helpful, and that there's always something that I can do. I can choose to be a creator, and I can choose to take action in my life in whatever circumstances I have to make things better, right? And that as long as I think I'm a victim, that's very limiting for my options. And so one of the things that I've been struggling with trying to figure out is like, how does this apply? Like, and at an individual scale, I understand very well, like, and how that works, right? But at a collective level, when there's like, if you're, poor, well, then supposedly is less fortunate. Is like, what do we do at a societal level? Or, like, how do we deal with this at a societal level so we don't put people in a box of like, oh yes, you are a victim and you can't, like, you can't get out of this? Or what kind of structures do we do around this?
Big question. Mm-hmm. So permit me a big breath first.
Yes.
Great question. One of the things that makes my life a joy is that I do a lot of interviews, and occasionally somebody asks me a really great question. So may I spread out into this a little bit?
Yeah, I would love that.
How long are we on the air for, by the way?
As long as you have, pretty much.
Okay, great. So, first of all, I want to say that it's a huge metaphysical question, first of all, for the following reason. The moment you point the finger at blame at another person, the moment you disown something and say, damn you, if it weren't for you, I'd be a whole lot happier now. Mm-hmm. That's underlying of most couple relationship arguments. Yes. I'd be a whole lot happier now if you weren't so damn fill in the blank. Mm-hmm. And you better quit filling in the blank, otherwise I'm out of here. So there's lots of things like that involve this move here. Mm-hmm. What's at the other end of that move, though? What would be the exact healing opposite of that? What would be the exact positive opposite of that? I put a lot of careful study into that earlier on in my life, and I cracked the code. And what I realized is to go, but not with criticism. The other end of blame is, genuine wonder.
So it's not self-blame. It's not blaming yourself. It's
right. In fact, that won't work at all. Right. Why didn't I do that again? It never works because it's an unanswerable question. Because once you start, why did I do that again? There's an infinity of reasons. And that's a very poor use of your grapefruit rind up here. So savor for a moment that genuine wonder is at the other end of blame. It's at the positive opposite end. So if you go from blame to genuine wonder, you have a front door entry point to the creative universe itself. That's why I say it's a metaphysical thing. Because the more you open up and own responsibility, the more you are expanded into creative space. And in that creative space, lots of magic happens, surprising new things, like...
So the moment of...
65, I've published 7 mystery novels and have one under option now to Netflix and all of that. So to do all of that later on in life, whether you're 65 or 25, it doesn't really matter. It's to live in constant reinvention and to let the universe help you reinvent yourself by participating in its flow. And
so what I'm hearing almost is like you just the blaming finger and all that, you just kind of just like let it go and release that whole energy, and then you do that the wonder move instead.
Yes, genuine wonder
with openness, open heart, open mind, genuine curiosity. Open
it
throat,
feels good.
Or like
Can you feel how if you tried to fake it and said it wouldn't work, but if you like I really want to know,
there has to be a breath, there has to be an openness there in order for that to work. Yeah.
Yes, it's a humble openness. It's saying, I really don't know.
Yeah. And
boy, I get to see, when I work with people, I get to see that come over their face all the time when they realize that. It's like eating dessert cosmically.
Yes.
So I want to go a little bit further with that because that's where it starts in the individual. And so, in a way, you kind of have to forget the collective for a moment. But here's something to know about that. What I'm talking about is contagious. The moment a few people open up to it, more and more people want to. That's why The Big Leap is a bigger bestseller today than it ever was 9 years ago when it first came out. And every month it just keeps going up and up and up because people keep telling each other about it. That's good news for an author, but it's even better news for the universe itself because it means that a certain idea has contagion to it. And it's certainly no fault of the publishers. They don't do zip to publicize it. And so, I happen to know because I get a list of their zip every month. And so, but fortunately,
Harper won, everybody.
Because of word of mouth, it just keeps, same thing with Learning to Love Yourself. It sells more now than it ever did 40 years ago when I first wrote it. That was the first book I wrote the summer I was with Katie for the first time. And so it's now almost 40 years ago when when Learning to Love Yourself came out. So it's a delightful treat for an author to have books that have that amount of legs to them, especially with Learning to Love Yourself, because I mentioned in the introduction to it, the new introduction to it, that it got this terrible review in Psychology Today when it first came out 40 years ago.
Yeah.
The reviewer said basically it made him sick. You know, here was this respectable psychologist, Dr. Hendricks, who was talking about his own feelings and his own struggles with learning to love himself, and it just made this guy ill. And but fortunately, people read it, and it became a bestseller. So I've often had the thought of tracking down that reviewer and at least buying him lunch or something because he's paid for many Hawaiian vacations over the years.
Yes. So you're saying that move of like on the individual level, shifting from blame to wonder, and then that becomes contagious. So again, from so where does that take us into like policies or like strategies around, like basically what I'm seeing that we need to do or could do for at least is like, how do you create the space or the invitation, the structure that invites people to step in and take that personal responsibility, right? You can't take responsibility for someone else. You can take responsibility for yourself, and you can invite other people into that space. So what are the structures or frameworks around that would support that?
Yes, well, let me say one that might make a difference in the world very quickly. Right now, for example, if you wanted to be the victim of something, whether you really were or whether you even wanted to fake it, if you wanted to make money off victimhood, who would you call?
Who would I call?
Who would you call? What professional person would you call for help with that? For making money off your victimhood?
A publicist.
A publicist. Okay.
Drum up a media storm or something. I don't know. Who would you call?
Most people would say they'd call a lawyer, a personal injury.
Ah, yes.
Because, like, there are certain places you can drive in the world where the personal injury lawyers are what's on the billboard. Like, if you go through South Florida, for example, Miami, have you been injured have you taken this pill?
Injured, yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've seen those.
And so there's an industry, and I'm not saying lawyers are bad or anything like that. I have great lawyers that are friends of mine and everything, so I don't, but I'm just singling out what could be done about a particular area, because contrast that with this. What if you wanted to make money off of taking responsibility for something? Who would you call?
A lawyer to incorporate a business.
Okay, you do something positive. Maybe you could call your publicist too to get you on television.
Yeah.
Because it's so rare. But I'm saying that you wouldn't automatically have a yellow pages full of lawyers that would help you take responsibility for it. So I had this happened to pop into my mind as we were talking, because I can't remember if I told the story in The Big Leap. I may have. But there was a woman who consulted me once, and if I remember correctly, she'd been in something like 29 automobile accidents. And she was saying, I'm beginning to wonder if it has something to do with me. And she was, and her victim position was, when I asked her, why is that? And she was saying, well, life is dangerous. Driving on the highways is dangerous. So she had it completely over here. But I asked her to repeat the following sentence, which is, I am dangerous on the highways. And I have proof because I've had 29 accidents. I am a hazard to innocent people on the highways. That brought up a lot of emotion for her, because even though she was beginning to catch on to it and had even come in for some sessions to kind of inquire into it, there was a big part of her that still thought she was a victim of that. And so that's why I say it doesn't matter whether you really are a victim or your mind just thinks you're a victim, because it's until the moment that you actually take responsibility for it that you have access to that new portal in the universe that I'm talking about. The portal that comes from owning the place, not thinking you're renting the place. When many of us go through life with thinking an us versus them relationship with the universe, that it's me against this vast, massive force. I bet you even felt that way yourself, because many creative types have that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we're in possession of a singular spark that's just out. If we get real lucky, we know how to make a good living off of it.
Right. I remember, like, when I was struggling to get a visa to live in America, one of the things that I realized was that like, I asked myself that question, like, what is it about me that's making them reject my visa or making this visa not happen? And I was like, oh, I have this, I guess essentially this Groucho Marx thing, that I don't want to be a member. I see myself as like the one on the outside that's not a member, right? So I don't want to be in. And so, yeah, that kind of...
That's a great realization. And what happened? Did you get the visa?
I did, yes.
Let's let everybody know that, because there's not enough good news broadcast in the media world about that. The moment a person takes full responsibility for it and owns it, they're in the creative space then, and creative things are going to happen.
Yes. Yeah. So how do we spread that?
Well, I'm doing my part. I like to write books about it. And, one thing that could be changed in the legal world, for example, would be to put a cap on compensatory damage and personal damages of various kind. For example, if you go down to a country like New Zealand and you go on a thing like a bungee jump, you can jump like 1,000 feet, and things that would never be allowed in America. Because down there, if you get hurt in a bungee jump, the government pays for your hospital stay and gets you back on your feet again and gives you a monthly allowance for a period of time, and you're on about your business. You don't get to collect $13 million from the, the bungee jump place. And so, that's the one thing that really stuck out in my mind about, that's a cool thing about New Zealand. There are lots of other things that aren't so cool about New Zealand, but the fact that its ancient name among the natives was Land of the Long White Clouds. So there's this overcastness that you may be familiar with from Scandinavia.
Oh yes. Thank you very much for reminding me of that.
By the way, where did you take up residence now? Where are you living?
I'm in New York City.
New York City.
Yes.
And may I barge into your personal life? Are you still entertained by and entertained the young lady whose name was Phoebe at one point?
Yes, and whose name is now Nomi. Yeah, we're still together and very, very happy. Very happy together. Oh. Yes.
N-O-M-I?
N-O-M-I, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, she's actually, right now as we speak, she's speaking to Paul Richards, who is the author of Wild Attraction, which is a book that's on your shelf behind you unless you moved it. Because last time I was visiting you in your office, I saw that book and I was like, that sounds really interesting. I should read that.
Oh, well, I get sent every self-help book that's ever been.
So just because it's on your shelf is not an endorsement, is what you're saying?
It's probably on my shelf because I didn't even know it was on my shelf. But I have a great gift in my life, a young lady named Alessandra, who comes in and reorganizes my office and files everything away in the right place from time to time. And she's about to do another sort, or maybe is even in the process of doing it. It usually takes her a week or so to reorganize my office, but she puts everything away because as a creative type, I've been known to just leave everything laying around, because I'm no longer using it. I don't even notice it. And so there's all this stuff that gets laid around on my desk, and my desk gradually disappears, and then Alessandra comes along and straightens it out.
Got it.
And she likes it, too. She enjoys it. She's an organizational freak, and she just loves it.
Isn't that amazing that you can outsource all these things to people who love them and you don't when you don't? Yeah.
I remember a person that'll go down and stand in line at the post office for me. That's to me the ultimate luxury.
I know. It's so true. I remember when we visited the Met together, that you were like, you wouldn't even look at the map because you're like, why would I do that when this person is so much better at knowing where the stuff is than I am? So let me just ask every single person until I find it. It worked out.
To this day, even though I've gone to visit that Rembrandt, I don't know how many dozens of times, I still get lost on the way to it.
But it is a maze up there, I have to say. It's really hard to find.
Because you have to wend your way through all these different little galleries.
I know. It's like they don't want you to see it. It's too honest.
They want to make you work for it to really get to the best. Because many times when I enter that room and I see that painting and I burst into tears. And I'm even beginning to feel a little of it just now, just thinking of that painting. I love that painting so much. It's a genuine, to me, it definitely deserves to be called a work of art, because here's a person who has captured his own aging and his own shadow of his personality right there, and merciless.
Yeah. I remember you saying, if I can't, it inspired you to write your books, if I can't write as honestly about myself as this painting is about Rembrandt, then I should just pack up shop and not even bother. It's definitely stayed with me since.
And same thing with Van Gogh. The Starry Night painting had that same effect on me when I first saw it, and several of the sunflower paintings have that effect on me now. But I'll tell you, when I walk up those stairs, and see Starry Night for the first time in the Museum of Modern Art when I go there, it has that same effect on me. I burst into tears oftentimes, or at least tear up. The very first time I saw it and I burst into tears. It was like it hit a place in me that I hadn't realized I needed to go to call myself an artist. That like both Rembrandt and Van Gogh, if you look at that painting Starry Night, he painted it between the year he cut off his ear and the year he committed suicide. Mm-hmm. It has that amount of ferment in it. And sometimes I think to be in full ownership of our creative passions, we need to go to that depth in ourselves to open up that place which has the capacity to surprise us. And so whatever you can do to make that happen is what I like to be in the process of doing. At this stage in my life, one of the things that's of primary importance, I hadn't even realized this, earlier in my life I kind of took my body for granted, and now I realize that almost my full-time job is involved with feeling great. You know, that if I don't occupy myself, like if I go to the gym on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for an hour, and then on Tuesdays and Thursdays I do stretching and yoga, and sometimes do that another time during the week, on the weekends. And so I've organized my life around things that make me feel great. And so far so good. But I hadn't realized the amount of energy and investment it would take. So you have many years to look forward to that, but file that away in the back of your mind.
I was one that always never really liked, physical and working out and stuff. But since November, we have this body therapist, the one that educated Nomi in body therapy that we work with in Copenhagen, and he challenged me to work out 8 hours a week. So I've been doing that consistently since November. And it's made a difference. And these days, I will work out every single day, and in the afternoon when I'm done with, mentally just done, I need it. It's dramatically changed me. And I think that was, for me, that was going from oh, really 3 hours a week, that's a lot, to all right, just taking the big jump to 8 was what made all the difference.
And especially, like in our recent book, Conscious Loving Ever After, we studied people from 40 and up. Hey, thank you.
I also have a bunch of your books here, but that's not as exciting to look at.
Have you yet attained that magical age of 40, if I may ask?
I have, yeah. And you are actually very instrumental there, because I remember I was feeling very depressed around that time, and I wrote you, and you said, oh, it's too early, don't kill yourself now. Life only starts to get good after 40.
Well, see, we say around here that every breath you take after 40 is a choice between creativity or stagnation. Mm-hmm. Are you taking a stagnation breath, going through the motions, just getting through the day? Or are you taking a creation breath? What can I be? Who's the next me that's going to evolve here? You've been heavily involved with music much of your life, right? Mm-hmm. And now you're deeply involved in spreading a message of liberation by media. Mm-hmm. Liberating your mind, liberating your heart, coming into union with yourself. And who would have ever guessed this when you were a 15-year-old rebel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That you would be spreading this message? You would have probably barfed.
Probably, yes. Yeah. Oh my God. I remember when I first started to open up, and I had so much. I saw a video, it was a Debbie Ford thing, and she'd done this video, and there's this guy, grown man, who was crying, and I was like, oh, that's disgusting. That's so weak. I had all that stuff, right?
I can even remember my older brother. I got hit in the head on the baseball field one time. I took a straight shot right in the head, and he told me that I got hit so hard it even left the seam imprints of the baseball.
Oh, wow.
It knocked me right out. And I started crying, and he started sort of dragging me off the field. And he's, don't cry, man. Whatever you do, don't cry.
Right.
But I couldn't really stop. But I remember that message of, you're not supposed to do that around here.
Right, totally.
And he was probably, in my neighborhood, that didn't work very well. That would be a signal, would be a sign saying, beat the crap out of me in my neighborhood. And because it was a pretty tough place to grow up in the South in that era. So I got into regular fist fights with kids on my block all the time, in particular Jimmy Brunson. He and I would have to have a fist fight about once a week. And it would always be in the heat of summer, too. Now that I look back on it, it was probably we were hot and didn't have anything else to do. And that's often where human beings start fights with each other.
Yes.
In
angry, but with H for hot.
AA friends of mine have told me, HALT, if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, be careful about taking a drink at that time.
Right.
Handle it.
Or fighting or punching someone in the nose, yeah. So what is your experience with one thing that I see is a lot of Well, one thing that surprised me as I've looked more into this whole realm of politics and what's going on in the world is it seems like there's a lot of people who are thinking more, like it turns out humans think religiously or dogmatically and not rationally, which is, I mean, shouldn't be a surprise because like I do that too, right? But like, you know, even, I'm sure you've come across, even in science, there's a bunch of stuff that you know to be true from your own experience in your work that some scientists or mainstream science would resist. Is that correct?
Could you give me an example of what?
Well, intuition or like, you know, the whole mind-body connection and like placebo and all these things.
I'll give you two examples. Often when we do a interview about breathing or using your breathing, even though I've written 3 books on it and all of them widely known, they will often get another expert, a medical person, to come on at the end and say, well, like they got a guy to come on from Santa Barbara respiratory group or something, and he said, don't ever do any breathing exercises. The only thing to do with your breathing is if you get sick, come to me. That was the pitch. And I thought that was pretty blunt, but that was obviously where the guy was coming from. And whereas there's a vast literature, 3,000 and some studies of using breathing to deal with anxiety, using breathing to deal with depression. There's a whole vast literature on it done by sober, respectable scientists. And even if you go to an American Medical Association convention now, you'll see there's a tremendous number of seminars on breathing and body intelligence and learning to use your body sensations as a guide. And so it's a whole new world, but a lot of people haven't caught up with it yet. And in the media, they always love to play one thing off against another. Like
exactly.
We were on, what was it? It wasn't 60 Minutes. It was one of those, something like that, 48 Hours with Scott Pelley many years ago. And we talked about the value of being honest in relationships. If somebody was angry, saying, I'm angry. Somebody was scared, saying, I'm scared. Somebody sad, say, I'm sad. These kinds of things, so elementary and simple. They had to get another expert to come on at the end and say, be very careful about telling the truth in a relationship.
Oh, no.
It was one of those moments where I began to say, I feel maybe a little embarrassed to live on this planet right now. It hit me that way. But I realize this is where a lot of people are coming from. They genuinely are scared by what's inside. So we got to do something about that. So first thing we can do is start telling little truths like, I feel nervous right now, or I feel irritated, or my throat's dry. Something that would be very simple to get out your mouth, because it's unarguably true. So that's where we teach people how to say the unarguable truth. It's just little things that I'm looking at the rhododendrons out the window right now, or I see my aspen tree, or my throat feels dry.
That's so interesting. You know what? So my parents are in town right now from Denmark. And it just reminded me of the environment that I grew up in as a kid, where no one is doing that. No one is saying anything about what they're actually feeling, what's actually going on inside of them. But it's like you go up into your head, not even aware of what's going on here, and then you compute something to say as a response to that. Like last night, my parents were here for dinner, and I was like, it was late and I was tired and I needed sleep. So I was like, all right, it's time for me to go to bed. And then maybe my dad felt a little hurt by that or something, but that wasn't what he said. So what he said was like, oh, so do you want us to leave now, or do you want us to just shut the door when we leave? And I was like, what does that, what does that mean exactly? Right. But it just reminded me of that I think, that was what I grew up in, right? And
it's a reservoir of unexpressed feelings. That's
exactly, right.
A vast reservoir of unexpressed feelings.
There's a lot of that, yes.
And here's the funny thing. Almost none of them have anything to do with you.
No, no, absolutely
They were here long before you got here.
Yes, yeah.
You were a convenient magnetic pole for them, shall we say.
Yes. So, all right. So, what I was trying to get at before is like, what like someone who's that stuck in like the person you were talking about before who had 28 or 29 car accidents, what is it that persuades such a person to start to look at it differently? Like, what is that, like, that openness to changing of mind, where the mind is like really holding on to this idea, and what happens that starts that to open up a little bit?
Usually it's a life crisis, such as a heart attack or a health crisis or a big accident, like in the woman with 29
So what you're saying
accidents.
is, politically, what the best thing we could do is engineer a crisis for everybody, a life crisis for everyone.
What do you think's happening, bud?
Yeah.
That's happening.
Yeah.
We're in it.
Mm-hmm. And in what way do you mean? I can see many ways.
Well, I think there's a global tendency toward fascism going on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a global ascendancy of charismatic, right-wing dictator types. We happen to have one that sprang out of our system.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a big one in Hungary. They've got a big one in Turkey. You know, they're springing up all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people are disenchanted with the messes caused by freedom.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the abuses caused by freedom.
And when you say freedom, you mean freedom to, like...
Freedom to constitute a gang and have all of your faces tattooed the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to prove you're a gang. You know, and to have your gang be in every major city. You know, that takes a certain amount of freedom that wouldn't be tolerated wherever a dictator is really in power.
Right, right. I mean, so what's fascinating is, like, I see things differently. I've always been like super ambivalent about the whole left-right dichotomy. Right? It seems to me that the tendency on the left is to see everybody as victims, and we need to help them, and we can be heroes, and like they can't figure this out, so give them some money and stuff. And the tendency on the right is to kind of like be this old boys club that supports each other, and yeah, is a little scared of whatever's new and changing. And I've never felt like I fit into that.
Yeah, well, I never have either. I never like to look at the world through a political lens personally, because I always like to look at, whenever I see something that I don't agree with out here, you know, I vote and everything like that and express my opinions freely, as you can hear. And I realize ultimately it's up to me that do I get the lesson from that? Can I apply the lesson to that to myself? Is there anything else I can do about it? And so I ask myself those fundamental questions all the time. And, you know, my wife and I support 20 or 30 different organizations about causes we believe in. Everything from planting trees, you know, that's a passion of ours, and we support half a dozen tree organizations, and we support choice organizations, and we're members of the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy that buys up pieces of land to preserve it. So we like all sorts of things like that. I guess that makes me a progressive. But when it comes down to it, ultimately, they're all choices based on, is there any one particular thing I can do about that? Yes. Mm-hmm. I can give $1,000 to an organization that will then plant 100,000 trees with that. You know, that's a very, to me, useful thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what I find is like when you have these conversations with people around politics, it's a lot of like, you know, people see very selectively, and they see a movie, right? And then you start to see the things that fit with your beliefs that you have already. And so, you know, is Trump like someone who's liberating us from bureaucracy and like, you know, victimization of people, or like casting people as victim, or is he someone who's like a perpetrator and a fascist and a, like, which is it? And like the reality is that, like, just in agreeing on what's actually, like, you know, we're trying to summarize something that's so complex, like what you said, like we've become so complex beings, and the world around us that we've created is like even more massively complex, right? And then we're trying to summarize it down into like good, bad, you know, right and wrong. And
yeah, well, that's the way our minds see things. You know, it's a binary there's a binary function of the grapefruit rind, not underneath. That's a unitary function. It's all is one, everything is one, but our minds decide to divide it up into bits. And by the way, time has been so that in about 2 minutes, my team of crack window washers are going to descend on this place, as they must every week at this time. So I'm going to have to say goodbye, because the sacred window washing ritual must not be interfered with here.
Yes, not a problem. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any closing thoughts on this whole, what can someone who is genuine in wanting to take responsibility for their lives and wanting to, apart from just be the change you want to see, but what's your...
I just want to reach over here and get something. I'll be right back. When people come to our trainings, at the end of them, they get one of these wristbands. You can't really see it, but around the edge of it, it says, breathe, move, love. And what we mean by that is, if you can't think of anything else to do, take a conscious breath, move your body a little bit, and love as much as you can from wherever you are.
Got it.
Breathe, move, love as much as you can from wherever you are.
There you have it, people. From Gay Hendricks to you. Thank you so much for being here today, Gay. I really appreciate being with you every single time.
Well, good conversation, and enjoy your day in New York City.
Thank you. You too. Enjoy your clean windows. All right.
So long.
So long, friend.